Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to Canada once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel quite a few times before. Now, these guys are another relatively new addition to their local beer scene, but they've built up a very good reputation for themselves over the last few years, and yeah, I've been enjoying trying their beers over the last year or two. But if people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they're best known for their different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases here in Hong Kong. It's a style that I haven't tried from this brewery before, and it's also a sub-style that I haven't reviewed on the channel in quite some time. But I've heard very, very good things about this particular beer, and that makes me very curious to try it. So needless to say, I'm really curious to see how good this beer is. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head over to Canada like I said. We're going to go to the province of Ontario, to the kind of Ottawa area, and we're going to go a little bit to the southeast to a wee place called Glen, Robertson. And that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful Wood Brothers Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called the Filthy Fernando. It comes in at 8.5% ABV. They're describing this one as a breakfast stout, and it contains coffee, pecans, dark chocolate, and peanuts. So yeah, this is yet another beer that I picked up from the wonderful Angry Beer in Mongkok here in Kowloon in Hong Kong, and they always get a decent selection of Wood Brothers stuff actually. But yeah, I was very curious to try this because this is the very first beer from the darker end of the spectrum that I've tried from Wood Brothers. We've had some great IPAs from these guys over the last year or so, so I was very curious to try something different from them, and this seemed like a very, very good bet. Been a very long time since I've tried a breakfast stout on the channel actually, so this is one of the lower ABV stouts that I've tried in quite some time, so hopefully it's good. But yeah, knowing Wood Brothers and the reputation that these guys carry and the stuff that I've heard about this beer, I'm pretty sure it will be. But let's crack on then and see what this beer is going to have in store for us. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Wood Brothers Brewery before, and we will no doubt add more to that list at some point in the fairly near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, province, whatever you like. If I reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Canadian playlist along with a number of other things. That's being added to quite regularly of course, because we do get a good selection of Canadian beers here in Hong Kong, but do make sure you check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well, because there are some very interesting things on the channel these days, even if I do say so myself. But yeah, let's crack on then and go to the brewery history section of the video. So to tell you a wee bit about Wood Brothers. So Wood Brothers Brewing Company, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Glen, Robertson in Ontario, which you'll find to the southeast of Ottawa, the Canadian capital, but it's also to the west of Montreal over in Quebec province, which is actually a bit closer when you look at it. But the project started back in 2017, and the company officially opened their doors in 2019, and the main people behind it are Mark and Natasha Ricard, Louise Castonguay, Dan Whitehead and Kurt McSwain. So Mark and Natasha are serial entrepreneurs, and the couple own White Pine Lumber, which is a furniture company and offers various different wood services. Mark has his own design company as well. Kurt is a farmer and he runs a company called Dalgara Farms, and his family have been on their land in North Glengarry for at least 4 generations, and they're producing a number of different hops and grains and things like that that are used in the Wood Brothers beers. But Dan and Louis actually worked as as brewers and were involved at La Brosse Brewery in Pontclair over in Montreal, and they've got their own brand as well called Gravedigging Bros, which you can follow on Instagram. But all of the founders apparently kept their day jobs when they started the company, but things have obviously been restructured over the last few years. But prior to the official opening, they had apparently brewed around 150 batches to perfect a number of different recipes, and the brewery itself is based on a 65-acre farm, and they tapped their first keg in the spring of 2019. But over the years, they've been building up the brewery infrastructure, which included adding a new brew house in 2020, and they've apparently tripled in size since foundation. They've got a tap room at the brewery that opens on Fridays and Saturdays, so you can go and try some of the beers at source. That's something that I hope to do at some point in the fairly near future. And over the last few years, they've just been building up their sales and distribution and things like that. But as of February 2025, when I'm reviewing this beer for you, these guys have produced 625 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and like I mentioned to you, they are best known for their different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. But there's quite a lot of breweries. You know, Quebec has always been a very, very good beer province in Canada, but Ontario is starting to produce some, has been starting to produce some very, very good stuff over the last few years as well. So yeah, lots of interesting things going on in the Canadian beer scene, and I'm sure the Canadian beer tubers like Lee Russell, Redbeard, Off the 10th, and all of these guys will be able to keep you up to date a little bit more with that than I can. So check out those guys if you get the chance. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Wood Brothers Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a wee bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's go on then and have a wee look at the beer itself. So you can see the artwork on this one is quite similar to what we've seen from Wood Brothers before. You can see the nice kind of hop leaf and stuff like that on there. Plain silver top on the can, of course. This one is 473 milliliters, which is 1 American pint. I'm not sure whether it's more correct to call it a North American pint right enough, but yeah, this one I bought, I think I bought this one just before Christmas, and this was canned on the 19th of September, if I'm reading that correctly, because yeah, the Canadians do the date that weird backwards American way. So yeah, this was canned on the 19th of September 2024. So we're drinking this beer at about 5 months old, but when it's a breakfast stout, it's not going to matter all that much because this is a more malty leaning beer. But like I said earlier, the name of this one is the Filthy Fernando. It's an 8.5% breakfast stout with coffee, pecans, dark chocolate and peanuts added into it. So yeah, let's get this guy out into the glass then and see what it's all about. I'm really very curious about this one. You could feel the can was getting a little bit excited there. So yeah, I've got a few bubbles popping out of this one. I'm not sure how well you're going to see that on the camera, but yeah, let's just be a little bit careful as we pour this one, because it seems as if it's a wee bitty excited, and obviously we don't want too much head on this to, you know, to the point where it's going to take ages to fade away. I think that's a good amount of the beer for the moment. We've maybe got about 3/4 of this out into the glass there, but you can see what we've poured has come out with just over a finger of a frothy, I would say kind of fawn coloured head. Actually, if you just look at that, it's a very light kind of beigey tan colour. You can see some medium-sized bubbles sitting on the surface of the liquid, and yeah, they're getting a little bit more soapy the further up the head that you go. But in terms of colour, I think it's definitely fair to describe this one as being along the lines of like a dark ebony rosewood colour. If we shine the light through it, it's got a little bit of that kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi coloured edge to it. But yeah, not much in the way of visible carbonation. I have to say the head is just fading away to be a thinner, more foamy layer at the moment, and you've got that nice kind of ring around the edge of the glass too. So yeah, the head really is fading away at the moment, but it looks very, very nice. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts you put into the beer will affect its colour as well. But when it comes to black beers like imperial stouts, porters, these kind of things, it's very difficult to actually affect the colour of these with barrels and adjuncts and things like that. So that's absolutely worth bearing in mind here. The coffee, of course, will play a little bit of a role in this one, but yeah, I don't think there's anything really surprising about this beer. But remember, coffee is a very interesting adjunct to put in beers. It's one of my favourites, actually, because, you know, coffee beans can be just as diverse as hops. You can grow them in different parts of the world, so you need to think about different soil profiles and water profiles and stuff like this. You've got the different varieties of beans, and then you have the mazel, the meters above sea level at which the coffee is grown, because that also affects the kind of flavours that you get. I don't even drink coffee, but yeah, coffee is a very, very interesting adjunct to put into different beers, of course. But yeah, I think we said everything we need to about the technicalities of this particular beer, so we can move on and have a wee look at the aroma of this. I think it should be very, very interesting. Appearance-wise, it certainly looks very nice. At 8.5% as well. The only other thing I would say about this is that this is maybe like export stout strength. I think, yeah, you know, you've got a few different classifications of stout. I've seen, you know, your regular stouts, you've got your export stouts, which are, you know, the sort of 8%ers. You don't find too many at this ABV around these days, but then, yeah, your imperial stouts tend to be, you know, 10% plus and things like that. So, yeah, let's have a wee look at the aroma of this one then and see what it's all about. I'm very, very curious about this. Oh yeah, coffee jumps out of this one straight away, but it's a very, very well balanced stout actually. I'm a sucker for the Brazilian Imperial coffee stouts, actually, as you'll know if you've watched the channel for any length of time. Some of the coffee that you get out of South America can make some really, really interesting stuff. And the Brazilians do their Imperial stouts in such a way that they're like old school RISs, but just with these really nice coffee beans added into them. But this beer actually comes across in a similar way to those ones, but we need to remember we've got pecans, dark chocolate and peanuts in there. So it actually has a fair little bit of sweetness to it, this one as well. But aroma wise, I will say straight away, it is really, really nice. So the coffee jumps out at you straight away and you can smell an almost like sweet, woody-like backbone from the nuts in here, but aroma-wise, it's good. It is very, very nice. Yeah, you can sit and smell that all day, and it has a surprising, well, I don't know if surprising is the right word, but it's got a really good level of complexity to it when you consider the fact that it's only like that it's only about 8.5%. So yeah, let's just try and break this one down then for you and describe the aroma that wee bit more in depth. Yeah, it's lovely stuff actually. Yeah, the backbone of this beer, you've got a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in there, but not too much. It's not too aggressive and it's not too kind of dry actually. There's definite little elements of like woodiness in there. So yeah, roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, little bit of kind of woodiness and things like that as well, like I said. Then the backbone of the beer, you can smell a little bit of an almost like rye bready character to it, but it almost has, there's some wholemeal brown bread in there as well. But for me, there's quite a lot of like chocolate muffin, chocolate sponge in this one, and you've got the nutty characters just blended throughout that actually. So yeah, the way that that goes together, I think, is it's really, really interesting. So yeah, you've got the chocolate sponge, you've got the rye bread in there, the chocolate sponge, a wee bit of wholemeal brown bread, and yeah, all the nutty characters are just kind of blended throughout that. So yeah, the way that that goes together is actually really, really interesting in this one. Yeah, so for me, the hoppy side of things in this beer really just adds a little bit of complexity to it. What I was actually going to say was the chocolatey side of this beer is really interesting, because they did say it was dark chocolate, didn't they? But it doesn't come across as being overly high in terms of its percentage of cocoa. It's maybe like 50 or 60%, and it gives the beer like a really, really nice balance. So yeah, it's really yeah, it's a really nice it has a really nice balance to it. I mean, I'd say, yeah, 50 or 60% cocoa chocolate would be how I would describe the chocolatey elements of this one. And it's kind of oily in that sense, like a nice oily chocolatey type character. And on top of that, you start to get some of the brown sugary elements out of this beer. So there's a little bit of a leathery brown sugary character to this one, and a wee bit of a toasty brown sugar as well. But usually when it comes to stouts, you have a few ways to play with these. You know, you can do a double mash, you can do a longer wort boil. The double mash is going to give you a more kind of sticky mouth feel, whereas the longer wort boil is going to give you the more leathery brown sugary type characters. It's a bit unusual to do that for a stout at such a low ABV though. You can put adjuncts into it, you can barrel age it. Yeah, these four things are the main variables that you can play with when it comes to stouts or imperial stouts generally. I do wonder if this one's had a slightly longer wort boil because of the leatheriness of the brown sugars that are in there. But yeah, you've got the toasty brown sugary characters in there. You've got a sweeter caramel to it as well. And yeah, there's maybe just a wee hint of like a biscuity note sitting on top of that. But yeah, it's a nice aroma, this one, but it's not overly saturated or pungent or however you want to describe it. It's just at a really nice level. I think that's a way to describe what's going on in here. So gets a thumbs up from me in that particular regard. So yeah, I'm happy enough with that. Yeah, I don't know if there's too much else to say about the malty side of this one. So let's focus on the yeasty side of things. The yeasty character always comes out a little bit at the back of the nose. For me, the yeasty side of this beer, it has a little bit of an almost rye bready character to it. There's a wee bit of like a Scottish, English, Christmas puddingy type note, you know, that phenol-y, highly caramelised cakey sort of thing. I know that quite well because my dad's birthday's in February. He loved having Christmas pudding as his birthday cake, you know, because he's a weirdo like me. But yeah, this one, the yeasty character in this one is a little bit, yeah, sort of phenolic Christmas cake, kind of Christmas pudding rather, sort of rye bready, some stuff like that going on in here. In terms of the hoppy side of this beer then, so you need to remember that imperial stouts are not the most hop forward of beer styles, and of course the longer that you keep these beers, the more the hoppy character is going to drop out. I keep saying imperial stout, but this one's more like an export stout, so pardon my slips if you like. But yeah, this beer does have a little bit of green component to it. There's certainly a wee bit of like earthiness in there. There's a wee bit of floral character. You've got a nice little bit of kind of grassy, zesty note in there as well. But yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is quite nice. It adds a wee bit more complexity to the beer in a sense. So yeah, little bit of earthiness, little bit of woodiness, some nice floral aromaticity, and a wee touch of kind of grassiness coming out of this one. So yeah, the elephant in the room that we haven't really mentioned in the aroma so far is the coffee, and I wanted to let my nose adjust to that a little bit. So the coffee, for me, coming out of this one, it smells like it's a kind of, like, not such a strong roast, if that makes sense, but there's a lot of aromaticity to it, quite a little bit of like red fruit, you know, like plums and prunes and stuff like that, and you can really smell the coffee coming out of this one, particularly in the top of the nose. But yeah, it takes a wee bit of time just to kind of show its head almost, but there's a wee bit of earthiness to the coffee as well, which I think comes out with a wee bit of time too. So yeah, the coffee side of this beer, I think, is really quite interesting. But it's a big thumbs up from me. Yeah, I like that in this one. It's quite, it's certainly quite interesting. So yeah, let's round off our look at the aroma with a look at the fruity side of this beer then. So yeah, for me, there's definitely a wee touch of like a raisiny, plummy, raisiny sharpness to this one, sorry. But underneath that, you've got more of a kind of oily, plummy side to the beer. There's wee elements of like, you know, dates and sultana in there, some figs as well. And I'm getting a wee bit of blackcurrant, but I think, yeah, the raisins, the plums, the dates and the figs and stuff like that, those are definitely the most prominent aroma notes that are coming out of this beer for me, that's for sure. But yeah, a really nice smelling stout, this one. I mean, with the level of aroma that this one gives you, you can tell it's not like a big 10-12% thing, but it still packs a fair punch from that aroma perspective. So as I always say, take a bit of time to just enjoy the aroma of your beer before you get stuck into it. But I think it is about time that we try this one and see what it's all about. So let's do it. This one is the Filthy Fernando, an 8.5% breakfast stout with pecans. What was it? Pecans, peanuts, coffee, and dark chocolate in it from the wonderful Wood Brothers Brewery in Glen, Robertson, Ontario, over in Canada. Let's do this. Sláinte, skål, cheers. Ooh, I'm gonna say straight away, that's pretty damn nice. I will admit, if I was drinking this one blind, I'd probably guess that this was like 6% or something. It drinks really, really nicely. It's very, very, a lot of stouts can be very, very smooth, but this one, it drinks like it's a lot lighter in alcohol. Actually, it's got the same smoothness as some of their IPAs. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a wee touch of like oat and wheat in this just to kind of smoothen the thing out. But it's a really nice beer, this one. I mean, I'm sure if these guys tried to do some big imperial stouts, I'm not sure if they have, I've certainly not seen them, but if they tried to do some of these big crazy imperial stouts, they'd probably do a bloody good job of it just based on the flavour of this one. This is very, very nice, actually. I mean, in a way, this beer reminds me of the plain dark beer from New Barns in Edinburgh. I mean, those guys were always very known for their lagers and their pale ales and stuff like that, but then they came out with plain dark beer and it was awesome. This beer kind of reminds me of that a little bit, because these guys are obviously, Wood Brothers are obviously awesome at IPAs, but then they produce something like this, which is just, it's really nice and it's really enjoyable. So maybe it's part of the novelty of the fact that, we know this is a good brewery and this is a beer at the opposite end of the spectrum from what they normally do. But yeah, I haven't reviewed a breakfast stout in quite some time, but I will say this is really, really enjoyable. And these days, with the number of breweries and stuff that we have, you can't really ask for much more. So yeah, this is worth trying, in my opinion, definitely. And you don't find too many, lower ABV stouts around these days from the more American style craft breweries, if we can call them that. So try this and just see what you think. This is a lovely beer, absolutely lovely beer. So thumbs up to Wood Brothers for this. Let's just break this down then and describe it more in depth for you. But I will say straight away, this drinks like it drinks a bit like an Irish dry stout, a sort of 6%er. It's kind of like that, just to give you a rough idea where we are on the beer spectrum. But yeah, very, very, very smooth, almost slightly creamy. And you get the sweetness and the fruitiness out of this one into the aftertaste. But let's start on that middle third of your palate then. The backbone of the beer, you have that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in there. As you move further forward toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of woodiness in there. You can feel there's a little bit of cracker sitting above that as well. And then above that, you start to get the more dense rye bready sort of character out of this one. So yeah, there's the dense rye bready notes in there. Then you've got a more wholemeal brown bready character above that. And then, I mean, this is the interesting thing. I would say that this beer, the flavours that you get are actually, in some ways, they really diverge with what you would expect from the aroma. I was expecting more of a kind of pastry stout type thing out of this, but it is more like a kind of old school English or Irish stout, this beer, which I'm glad about, because I'm not the biggest fans of those really sweet, marzipan-y, granola type pastry stouts that are going around these days. This is, the breakfast stouts, I do quite enjoy these. So yeah, for me, This one, it's above the, yeah, as I say, you've got the rye bread in there, the wholemeal brown bread. Above that, I will say, you've got a layer of this beer that could be like a sort of chocolate sponge cake, chocolate muffin. So there is a wee element, there is a slight element of that pastry stouty character to it, but within that sort of chocolate cakey type layer, that's where you're getting the kind of peanuts and the pecans out of this one. Those nutty characters are just sitting in there, and they give the cake that little bit more dryness, if we can call it that. But then, yeah, above that, you start to get the kind of chocolatey layer coming out of the beer. So let's look at that chocolatey side of things. So as I've often said, sweeter flavours come out further forward on the palate, more dry and bitter flavours come out further back. And the chocolatey layer that you have in this beer really kind of epitomises that, if you like. So at the back of that middle third of your palate, you can feel the chocolate. For me, it's almost slightly charred, like, 80-90% cocoa chocolate. But yeah, as you move further forward on that middle third of your palate, you start to get the you do start to get more of a 50-60% cocoa chocolate coming out of the beer. You can feel that this one really does sweeten up a wee bit the further into it that you go. So yeah, maybe 80-90% cocoa chocolate, sorry, further back, and it's even a little bit charred. Then yeah, as you move further forward toward the front third of your palate, it's a bit more like 50 or 60%. But then above that, you have like a kind of toasty brown sugary layer. Then there's like a circle in the middle of your palate, and the base layer of that is like a more leathery kind of brown sugar. And then yeah, the dead center of your palate has a wee bit of that kind of more caramelly treacle molassesy type thing. It's not too strong, of course, because this is just an 8.5% stout, but yeah, you get that kind of boozy caramelly note in there. That is, of course, from the alcohol in the beer. So yeah, I think we've covered the middle third of the palate in this beer quite well. But the thing that's interesting about this one for me is that the coffee actually comes out more on the back third of your palate with this beer. So let's just go over to the back third of your palate. And as I've often said, the back third of your palate gives you very similar flavours to the middle third of your palate, but just at different intensities. So yeah, the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get that nice little bit of bready build up in there. You've kind of got the rye bread in the base, the wholemeal brown bread above that, then you've got the more sort of chocolate spongy type character, and then yeah, you have the sort of toasty, chocolatey kind of characters sitting above that. So yeah, for me, the how do you say, the coffee notes actually on this one come out on top of the, or just under the yeasty side of the beer. So yeah, the back third of your palate, you've got the roasty toasty well-fired bread crust that I was talking about. You've got a kind of crackery layer. There's a wholemeal brown bready layer, you've got the rye bready layer in there, which goes a little bit lighter, taller, more airy and slightly drier than the wholemeal brown bready layer that sits above that, which again is a little bit lighter, taller, airy and drier. And then yeah, above all of that, you start to get the kind of chocolate spongy kind of character coming out of this one, which is lighter, taller, airy and more dry, and then some of the drier sides of the chocolate. But the coffee side of this beer kind of sits on top of that. Again, more dry and bitter flavours come out further back on the palate. So the coffee in this beer, for me, it's got a good little bit of earthiness to it. It feels like it's a bit more of a kind of dry roast, but at the same time, there's quite a little bit of an aromatic kind of floral type quality coming out of this one. And yeah, there's a wee bit of red fruity character to it as well, like, dates or figs and plums and things like that. So yeah, that comes out of the fruity side of this one as well. So yeah, I like that. I do really like that about this beer too. Yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is really, really nice in this one. So yeah, above all of that on the back third of the palate, you start to get the yeasty side of the beer. So for me, the yeasty side of this beer at its core, it's actually like quite a dry and roasty, toasty rye bread, but the coffee, of course, comes out more into the aftertaste as well. So that's given the beer a bit more of a kind of bitterness, actually. So at its core, the yeasty side of this beer is a little bit more like a kind of dry, toasty rye bready sort of note. As you move further out from that, it's a more mellow and slightly sweet rye bread, and then yeah, a toasty, slightly well-fired bread crust around the very edge there. And definitely the back third of your palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you move further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that wee bit more. So yeah, I do like how that pieces together in this beer as well. So in terms of the hoppy side of things with this beer, then remember, stouts are not the most hop forward style of beer, and of course the longer that you age these beers for, the more the hops are going to drop out. But this beer does actually have a fair little bit of hoppy character to it, which I think complements the coffee quite well, but also the kind of roastiness that this beer has, you know, one of the key elements of a breakfast stout. So yeah, in the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice wee bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it's a little bit more kind of woody, if you like, and as you push further forward towards the side of your palate, there's a little bit of a floral character there, then round the front curve of the tongue, it's just that little bit lighter and more grassy, wee touches zestiness there. But yeah, front third of your palate then, and the fruity side of this beer. So yeah, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get that little bit of bready build up in there. There's the kind of rye bread in the base, the wholemeal brown bread in the middle, and the sort of cakey character on top. Wee bit of the toasty coffee and chocolatey side of things there. But yeah, the base of that front third of your palate, you've got the well-fired bread crust, the crackery sort of note, the rye bread, the wholemeal brown bread, then the sort of chocolate sponge, and a wee bit of the drier side of the chocolate there. Then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's round off the tasting section with a wee look at that fruity side of things. So yeah, the fruity side of this beer for me, it's how would we say? The fruity side of this beer, at the back of that front third of your palate, you can feel there's a little touch of raisin on the top, then some juicy plum underneath, and the base of that, the back half of that front third of your palate, it's kind of, there's a mix of like prune in there and also date. You're getting these more stewed, kind of dry, fruity characters there. But as you move toward the middle of that front third of your palate, you've got a bit of a more kind of definite figgy type flavour. And then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, it's kind of like blackcurrant underneath and a little bit of a juicy blackberry on top. These are things that we've seen in stouts and imperial stouts before, so they are not particularly surprising, but still, the fruity character in this beer adds a really quite nice depth to it. But yeah, I'm very impressed with this one. It has the flavour profile of like a stronger, 10, 11, 12% imperial stout, this, but it's got the drinkability of a kind of 6%er as well. So yeah, I'm very impressed with what Wood Brothers have produced here. So this is one that I'd highly recommend. I don't find too many stouts at this ABV, but I think Wood Brothers have done a very, very good job of it. So give it a go for yourself and see what you think. The coffee element in this is very nice too. I love imperial coffee stouts, and the breakfast stouts, in my experience, are very good as well. So yeah, let's round off this review with just a wee quick look at the mouthfeel. So for me, we've said a wee bit about that a second ago, of course, but for me, this beer, yeah, it's kind of top end of mid-bodied. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying bottom end of full-bodied, but carbonation is very, very smooth. It's got a slightly kind of creamy and slick mouthfeel to it in a way, which I think is quite interesting. But the IBU on this one's got to be 70 or 80 IBUs. That's from the toastiness of the malt, the coffee, and all these sorts of things. Maybe a little bit from the hoppy character. Your malty base is roasty underneath, smooth in the middle, and a kind of smoother brown sugary character on top. And then yeah, you've got that nice kind of fruity character, that nice kind of oily fruity character that comes out of it as well. But all in all, it's a really, really nice, it's a really, really nice beer, this one. And I think, in terms of breakfast stouts, it's a little bit hard to beat in honesty. I think this is really, really nicely done. But like I say, this is a sub-style I don't come across all that often, so the novelty element is definitely at play here. But regardless, this goes to show that Wood Brothers can do the dark side of the spectrum very well, so I would love to see these guys try a few more different styles and put those out there. Scotch Ale, Belgian Quadruple, Doppelbock, just saying, we'd love to see you guys try it. And some big old school Russian Imperial stouts as well with different coffees could be very interesting. This is a very solid base for these guys to experiment on the dark end of the spectrum. A black IPA from these guys and some West Coast IPAs would also be very interesting, I hasten to add. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I like trying different kinds of beer from breweries that I know quite well. So yeah, if you get the chance to try something darker from Wood Brothers, I think on the basis of this it's going to be pretty damn good. But yeah, this one was the Filthy Fernando, an 8.5% breakfast stout with pecans, peanuts, coffee and dark chocolate from the wonderful Wood Brothers Brewing Company in Glen, Robertson, Ontario, over in Canada. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Wood Brothers Brewing Company as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But until then, check out my social media, check out Wood Brothers social media, check out some of my Canadian beer tubing colleagues, and I'll see you guys in another review very, very soon. Ciao just now.